So bushiroad Springfest has recently started, and as some of you may know, my team and I managed to place first in BSF Germany. Hey guys, welcome to this short retrospective video covering both decks that I played during the last few weeks, which includes both the Doorbar Fate that I brought to Antwerpen, which you can see right here, as well as the RWBY deck, which was Choice Standby, that we won Oberhausen with. Before we head in, I'd like to point out that when reflecting on the performance of a deck that I bring to a tournament, I don't usually like to focus on the specifics of the matches themselves, or like the lucky or unlucky elements that might have occurred during a game. Instead, I try to focus more on the types of matchups and the issues or awkwardness that I might have encountered, as well as the positives that I noticed when playing the deck. So first of all, we have Fate, which I brought to Antwerpen, playing the Rin level 1 Climax combo on the door, as well as the Rider top end that combos on the bar. The reason for bringing this deck is that I was expecting a lot of standby players. Since it is trios, I was expecting people to bring 8 standby Doll and standby door Kaguya still, with those numbers only being supplemented by Mushoku, which in most cases is also 8 standby. Now this deck usually auto-wins against standby. We pretty much leverage the level 1 Rin Climax combo, which gains up to 2.5k power on play, together with the Shiro Rider level 0, which can next something with 1k and pump one of our own characters with 1k to contest at least 2 lanes, which at level 1 is usually enough against standby to make them start bleeding resources, and also more than enough for us because at level 2 we pretty much just start free farming them every turn, where we keep resolving both of these 2-1 riders. Then near the end of the game, we just start looping the level 3 rider, grind it out until we finally win the game. So I did end up overestimating the amount of standby being played in Antwerpen. People dropped 8 standby Data Live and Door standby Kaguya harder than I expected here, meaning that playing field was a bit more spread out between standby decks and traditional 1k1 decks. Facing 1k1 decks more often meant that we did see some issues with the deck, especially the level 1 lineup that we have here started showing some cracks. Now usually against standby, not being able to contest the 2-2 that's being stand out on front isn't really that big of a deal, but not being able to contest one of our random opponents' costless level 1 5k bodies that they just use for a climax combo really shouldn't happen. You don't want to create an open lane or give a plus to a deck that really didn't do anything to achieve that, which just allows them to snowball even more. Even worse is when we needed to use one of our level 2s to contest level 1s, meaning that we do not get the full value but do spend stock. It just becomes counterintuitive and we become the one that starts bleeding resources. Now, a way to alleviate this issue would be to add more level 1 characters. However, that's easier said than done in Fate, as most level 1 characters are kind of garbage in this set. I do think there are some candidates, I'm just not sure what exactly to include yet. But another way to alleviate this would be by reintroducing Avenger into this deck, just as a 1 or 2 off, specifically for 1k1 decks, so that we could potentially reuse the level 1 Rin, reuse the 2-1 Rin and Archer, to keep having just your regular attackers. One other thing of note was that in practice games the level 3 rider did exactly what I expected it to do. This card was really good in practice against standby. However, what I did not account for was for the specific overtime ruling that was only upheld in BSF Antwerpen, which is that at the end of the 3 turns of overtime, we just skip damage comparison completely and the game becomes an instant double loss. Now, from what I heard, this ruling was a mistake, and at the next BSF they also corrected it. But you can imagine that playing a stall type deck is kind of bad when stalling leads to a loss. It just created some scenarios where instead of looping the rider and almost guaranteeing a win, we gave our opponent chances to win because we had to play somewhat suboptimally just to try and close out the games in the final turns. Just to wrap this up a bit, I do think that this deck is still pretty good against 8 standby. However, I feel like it's probably better suited for a singles tournament where you can pretty much guarantee that most people will be playing like the top decks, and if those top decks include standby decks, then this is probably the pick to bring. With some slight adjustments, I also think that it could function better against 1k1 decks, but I think that this exact list as shown here is probably a bit too greedy. I think I'd definitely recommend a Door Fate over this build for trios at least, which probably has a much easier time because of the deck space that they can afford due to the consistency of the 8 door triggers they have. So yeah, that was it for Fate. Moving on to the list that I played in Oberhausen, which was a RWBY list. Playing 4 choice 4 standby, where the standby is a 2-2 split between the RWBY Climax and the Pyrrha Climax combo. Now this deck is honestly a lot of fun. I've been playing a version of this deck since the release of RWBY. and this is like the 5th or 6th iteration of it. One of the biggest differences with this build and earlier versions or other standby dwarf versions or 8 standby decks is the complete lack of blue in this deck, meaning we do not have access to the early play Blake, the bottom deck bombs, the stunner, what else, the level 2 killer. We only have the level 0 James and the 2-1 counter, which doesn't require blue anyway. We also do not have access to the Neapolitan level 3, which most people run in conjunction with the RWBY, just for the sake of being able to guarantee targets on the board for a clock kick. Instead, we opted to cut all of those just for the sake of streamlining the deck a bit and opening up a bit more space for consistency and for some techs. So this deck feels really good to play as is, but there are some awkward spots that might need changes. Our level 0s are somewhat on the weaker side, so we might not be able to contest everything out there, like Armin runners or chasers or whatever. But usually you don't really care that much about our opponent plussing early, as we plan to keep snowballing from level 1 onwards. We do have the Neon Cat included in this deck, so we can deal with most turn 1 plays out there, which might be enough of a setback usually. You're not winning level 0 most of the time. So instead we run a very toolboxy level 0 lineup that allows us to hand fix for future turns. We also have a lot of natural draw in this deck, between the James level 0, the Pyrrha level 1 that can draw on play, and I guess you can consider the level 1 Taiyang natural draw as well, as you can check the top 3 and add anything from there, which means that we do get to see climaxes more often into our hand. We also have many ways of getting the exact climax we need, be it between the 2-1 Jean assist that can swap between the choice and the Pyrrha standby, the level 0 RWBY that can just swap between any climax, and the level 1 event that can just grab the exact climax from Winning Room. This means that we can always resolve the climax combo that's most optimal to resolve at that point in the game. Now this also means that we can easily keep replaying the level 1 climax combo to keep our advantage high. The Jean level 1 is honestly very underrated, or at least used to be. Being able to offload the actual on reverse portion of the climax combo to a character that's practically guaranteed to get its reverse off is just really good right now. Playing the climax and putting 2 or 3 on reverse searches on the Pyrrha level 1, and then using her against Mushoku, for example, to reverse a level 1 Edis, while still possibly contesting a different lane with like the Jean and the Glinda, or double Jean, which also reaches enough because he pumps 2k. It's just really liberating, and it honestly makes it less rewarding for the opponent to prep a counter to win a lane, since can't deny you the +3 you get off of this combo. This also means that unlike other level 1 non-reverse combos, this combo actually stays relevant outside of level 1. As we can just keep targeting and pumping one of our level 2 characters, which are more likely to reverse something at that stage of the game. Then on level 2, we just have our generic Hanon core standby target, which is really nice to have, to guarantee a 2-soul body to use with the Pyrrha Climax combo at level 2. The Hanon core is like the easiest way to keep such a body on board, since we do not run early plays of any kind. Other than the Climax combos, the game plan is just keep a big board, keep a counter to save that big board, use the 2-1 assist whenever necessary to reach some extra power. It's pretty standard overall. So in Oberhausen, I actually faced a lot more standby decks. The matchup for this deck against Mushoku and other standby decks like Slime is very solid due to how the level 1 Climax combo works. Then we have the RWBY level 3 top end that also just completely skips combat, meaning we do not have to worry about rest counter or the next soul counters in both Slime and Data Life. 8 standby decks in general also usually struggle with deck speed, and they were more likely to leave behind the deck state that's very punishable by the Pyrrha, which just sometimes pushes them too far behind and can easily seal us the win over a couple of turns. Now we also have a very good matchup against more traditional 1k1 decks, as we ourselves can play a more traditional type of game plan, since we can keep up in advantage and soul damage due to how often we can access the choice climax in this deck. Now the worst matchup for this deck would probably be Bang Dream with Choo Choo, which I luckily did not face at all. If they set up the Choo Choos early, then there's really not that much that we can do other than just trying to stick some chump damage in by crashing our board. If we do set up board against them early, then with the level assist, we might be able to threaten board with the memory counter, since they can't really afford to lose freshly played Choo Choo by walking into a memory counter, as they will lose out on the heal and lose most power on the board. But other than that, that matchup seems pretty bad. Another bad matchup that I actually did face is against a very heavy early play heal focused deck like Bandstory Slime, which I faced and lost against twice to the same player. Since this deck doesn't really have massive reach, and instead trying to push some amount of guaranteed damage when possible, if a deck can heal down at level 2 for like half or even more of the damage that we push in a turn, then we kind of do start to struggle a bit with closing out the game. With only 4 healers, since we only have 4 copies of the RWBY as our healer, there's no real way for us to outlast them. Luckily, this type of deck isn't really something that others would build against specifically, so the only deck really posing a threat would be Bang Dream running Choo Choo in some way or shape. I'm not really sure how to exactly approach that other than speccing into blue again, but only having one bad matchup, unless I'm overlooking something, is really solid as far as matchups go. For RWBY in general though, I'm pretty convinced that having a split Climax top end is the way to go, as it just gives you a lot more options. Having the multiple combos just adds another layer of depth to the deck that most players can't really play around. So that was it for the RWBY deck. I'm still not quite sure what I would change, if anything. I think this deck will actually stay strong as long as standby is strong, as it has such an easy time of resolving its main level 1 Climax combo and the rest of its game plan. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comment section, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.